My daughter-in-law leaned in close at dinner and whispered, "I'm carrying your husband's child." I didn't drop my fork. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at her and smiled. What I did next destroyed everything they thought they had so carefully built. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. I've learned that stories like mine travel farther than we ever expect." The dining room smelled faintly of rosemary and roasted chicken, the same recipe I had been making every Sunday for over 40 years. The table was set with my good china, white porcelain with a thin gold rim, a wedding gift from a couple who had long since passed away. I still used it. Not because anyone noticed, but because I remembered. At 67, routines become anchors. You hold on to them, especially when everything else begins to feel like it's quietly slipping out of place. My husband, Daniel, sat across from me. 42 years of marriage, and I could still recognize the smallest shifts in his behavior. The way he avoided eye contact that evening, the way his fingers tapped lightly against the edge of his plate, the way he laughed, just a fraction too late, at something our son said. Our son, Michael, sat to my right, scrolling through his phone between bites. He had always been a quiet child. Gentle. Observant. The kind of boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and say they were sunflowers for Mom. Now, at 38, he barely looked up. And then there was her. Emily. My daughter-in-law of 6 years. She sat to my left, posture perfect, her blonde hair falling neatly over one shoulder. She had always been beautiful in a polished, deliberate kind of way. The kind of beauty that made people assume warmth, even when there was none. She smiled often, but it never quite reached her eyes. Dinner moved along in that careful, artificial rhythm families sometimes adopt when no one wants to acknowledge what's really happening beneath the surface. Michael talked about work, Daniel nodded, Emily added small comments at just the right moments. And I served the food. I passed the potatoes, refilled glasses, cleared small plates. The role I had played for decades. The one I had perfected. Invisible, but essential. It wasn't until I reached for the salt that Emily leaned closer. Close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral, expensive, unfamiliar. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Soft. Controlled. Deliberate. "I'm carrying your husband's child." For a moment, the world didn't shatter. It didn't spin. It didn't collapse. It simply stilled. The clink of silverware, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of a car passing outside. Everything sharpened. I turned my head slowly, meeting her eyes. She was watching me. Not nervously, not with guilt. But with something far colder. Anticipation. She was waiting for something. A gasp. A scene, tears, maybe even the kind of public breakdown that would make me look exactly the way she had already decided I was: old, fragile, replaceable. Instead, I held her gaze. And I smiled. A small smile, polite, almost appreciative. Then I picked up my glass of water and took a slow sip. When I set it back down, my hand didn't shake. Across the table, Daniel cleared his throat. Just once. It was subtle. So subtle that Michael didn't notice. But I did. After 42 years, I knew every version of that sound. That one meant discomfort. Fear, even. But he said nothing. Of course he didn't. Emily leaned back in her chair, her expression flickering, just for a second. Confusion. It passed quickly. She picked up her fork again, continuing her meal as if she had just commented on the weather. I reached for the serving dish and placed another piece of chicken on Michael's plate. "You should eat more," I said gently. "You've been working too hard." My voice sounded normal. Warm, even. Michael nodded absently. "Thanks, Mom." No one else spoke about it. Dinner continued. Conversation resumed. And just like that, the moment, if anyone else had noticed it at all, disappeared. But something had shifted. Not in the room. In me. After dinner, I stood at the sink, washing the dishes by hand. I had never liked the dishwasher. Too impersonal. Too loud. Water ran over my fingers, warm and steady. Behind me, I could hear the faint murmur of voices in the living room. Michael laughing softly at something on television. Emily's voice, light, practiced, Daniel saying very little. That, too, was new. He used to fill rooms with conversation. Stories. Opinions. Small observations about things most people overlooked. Now, silence suited him. Or perhaps silence protected him. I dried a plate carefully, placing it back in its proper spot. Everything in my kitchen had a place. Every cup, every utensil, every memory. I wondered, briefly, when I had lost my place. Or if I ever truly had one. A reflection caught my eye in the window above the sink. An older woman stared back at me. Silver hair pulled neatly back, fine lines around her eyes, posture still straight, but carrying something heavier now. She didn't look broken. Not yet. But she looked aware. An awareness changes everything. That night, Daniel came to bed later than usual. I was already lying on my side, facing away from him. The lamp on his side clicked off. The mattress shifted as he lay down. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, he said, "You're still awake." I didn't turn around. Yes. Another pause. "I thought dinner went well," he added. There it was. Not a question. A statement. Carefully chosen. I let the silence stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then I said, softly, "It was memorable." He didn't respond. But I could feel it. The tension. The awareness. The unspoken understanding that something had been said, something that should have changed everything. And yet, I had not reacted. Not in the way they expected. Not in the way they had prepared for. They thought they had time. They thought I would break slowly. They thought I would question, doubt, maybe even confront them in a way that gave them control over the narrative. They were wrong. Because what Emily didn't understand, what Daniel had forgotten, was that I had spent a lifetime watching, listening, remembering. And when you've been underestimated for that long, you learn how to wait. You learn how to gather pieces quietly. You learn how to let people reveal exactly who they are without ever interrupting them. I closed my eyes. And for the first time that night, I allowed myself to think the words I hadn't said out loud. Not yet. If she's telling the truth, then this isn't just betrayal. This is strategy. And strategies can be dismantled. Piece by piece. Without ever raising your voice. I woke up before sunrise the next morning. That wasn't unusual. At my age, sleep comes in fragments. A few hours here. A few there. The rest of the night is spent lying still, listening to the quiet, and to your own thoughts. But this morning felt different. Heavier. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The same ceiling I had looked at for decades. The same room. The same house. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. Beside me, Daniel was still asleep. Or at least, he was pretending to be. His breathing was too measured. Too controlled. I didn't turn to look at him. I didn't need to. After 42 years, I knew when a man was avoiding the truth, even in his sleep. I got out of bed quietly and walked to the kitchen. The floor was cold beneath my feet. The house still, wrapped in that early morning silence that used to feel peaceful. Now, it felt watchful. I started the coffee maker. The familiar sound filled the room, steady and predictable. I leaned against the counter, arms folded, and let my mind replay every second of last night. Her voice. Soft. Certain. I'm carrying your husband's child. Not a question, not a threat. A statement. That was what stayed with me. She hadn't been testing me. She had been informing me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and took a slow sip. It tasted the same as always. Strong. Bitter. Reliable. Unlike people. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. Light. Careful. Emily. Good morning, she said, her voice bright, almost cheerful. I turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge her presence. Good morning. She moved around the kitchen like she belonged there. Opening cabinets. Taking out a glass. Pouring orange juice. Comfortable. Too comfortable. As if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't leaned into my space and whispered something that should have shattered a family. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She didn't look at me directly. But I could see it. That same quiet confidence. That same expectation. She was waiting. Still waiting. For me to react. To ask questions. To demand answers. I set my cup down gently. You didn't sleep much, I said. It wasn't a question. She paused for half a second. Then smiled. I slept fine. Of course she did. I nodded once, as if I believed her. And that was when I understood something very clearly. She wasn't afraid. Not of me. Not of the truth. Which meant one thing. She believed she had already won. I picked up my coffee again, turning toward the window. Outside, the sun was just beginning to rise. Soft light stretching across the yard. Everything looked calm. Normal. But I had lived long enough to know. The quietest mornings often come right before everything falls apart. By mid-morning, the house had fully woken up. Doors opening, water running, and muted voices drifting from room to room. The rhythm of a normal day. I moved through it the way I always had, quietly, efficiently, without drawing attention to myself. Breakfast was simple. Toast. Eggs. Coffee. Michael sat at the table again, scrolling through his phone, his tie already loosened even though it wasn't yet 9 a.m. He looked tired. Not unusual. But today, I noticed something else. Distance. Not just from me. From everything. Emily stood by the counter, slicing fruit with careful precision. Each movement measured. Controlled. Daniel came in last. He paused for a second when he saw all of us gathered there. Just a second. But it was enough. I watched the way his eyes moved. Not to me. To her. Emily didn't look up. But she knew. You don't need to look at someone to know they're watching you. Morning, he said, clearing his throat. Michael nodded. Morning, Dad. I placed a plate in front of Daniel. Eat while it's warm. My voice was steady. Always steady. He sat down slowly, picking up his fork like it weighed more than usual. No one mentioned dinner. Of course not. People like this don't confront truth. They adjust around it. Pretend it doesn't exist unless forced into the open. I sat down across from them and folded my hands neatly in my lap. Then I waited. Not for a confession. Not for an explanation. Just observation. Emily finally looked up. Her eyes met mine for a brief moment. And there it was again. That quiet, unsettling calm. As if she had already calculated every possible outcome and chosen the one that favored her. You have a doctor's appointment today, don't you? She asked, turning to Daniel. Her tone was casual. Too casual. Daniel hesitated. A fraction of a second. Yes, he said. Routine checkup. Routine. Such a simple word. I took a sip of my coffee. You've had a lot of those lately, I said softly. No accusation. Just a statement. Daniel's hand paused mid-air. Then continued. Emily smiled faintly, placing a bowl of fruit on the table. It's important to stay healthy, she said. I nodded. Of course. Silence settled again. But this time, it felt different. Thicker. More deliberate. Michael stood up first, grabbing his keys. I've got a meeting, he said. I'll be late tonight. Emily turned toward him immediately, her expression softening. I'll wait up. He smiled at her. Warm. Familiar. The kind of smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Then he left. The front door closed. And just like that, the room changed. It was subtle, but undeniable. Daniel shifted in his seat. Emily set down her knife. No more performance. No more need to pretend, at least not completely. I dried my hand slowly with a towel, placing it neatly back in its spot. Then I turned toward them. Not confrontational. Not emotional. Just present. I think, I said quietly, it's time we all start being a little more careful with our routines. Emily tilted her head slightly. Daniel didn't look up. I held their silence for a moment longer. Then I added, just as calmly, patterns have a way of revealing things people think are hidden. No one responded. But they understood. And for the first time, I saw something shift in Emily's eyes. Not fear. Not yet. But awareness. The kind that comes right before someone realizes they may have underestimated the wrong person. That afternoon, I left the house. I didn't say where I was going. No one asked. That, too, was new. There was a time when Daniel would have followed me to the door, asking if I needed anything, reminding me to drive carefully, kissing my cheek like it was a habit he never questioned. Now, silence followed me instead. I drove slowly. Not because I was unsure, but because I was thinking. Every word, every glance, every pause from the last 2 days replayed in my mind, clearer now, sharper. Patterns. That was the word I had used. And patterns, once you start seeing them, don't disappear. They multiply. I didn't go to the grocery store like I usually did on Tuesdays. I didn't visit my neighbor or stop by the post office. Instead, I parked across the street from a small medical building just 10 minutes from our home. I had seen the name before. On a receipt Daniel had forgotten to throw away. On a calendar entry he said was routine. Routine. I sat in the car with the engine off, watching the glass doors. People came and went. Young couples. Middle-aged men. A woman holding a folder tightly against her chest. No one looked suspicious. That's the thing about secrets. They don't look like secrets from the outside. At exactly 2:17 p.m., Daniel's car pulled into the parking lot. Right on time. Of course. He stepped out, adjusting his jacket, glancing around briefly before heading inside. Not nervous. Not rushed. Familiar. He had been here before. More than once. I waited. 5 minutes. 10:20. Then another car pulled in. White. Clean. Quiet. Emily. She stepped out, sunglasses on, her movements calm, almost rehearsed. She didn't look around. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight into the building. Together. But not arriving together. Careful. Planned. I leaned back in my seat, my hands resting loosely in my lap. My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. Because now, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was confirming. I stayed there for nearly an hour. Long enough to see them leave. Not side by side. Daniel came out first. Then, 12 minutes later. Emily. Spacing. Timing. Precision. I almost admired it. Almost. When I finally started the car, I didn't follow them. There was no need. I already had what I came for. Not proof. Not yet. But something more important. Direction. Because betrayal like this doesn't happen in chaos. It happens in structure. In routines. In carefully built lies that rely on one thing above all, that no one is paying attention. I pulled onto the road, the late afternoon sun cutting through the windshield. And for the first time since that whisper at dinner, I allowed myself a small, quiet thought. They think this is their story. But they've been walking through mine without realizing it. And stories like this don't end the way they expect. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove a few blocks past our street and pulled into a quiet parking lot near a small park. The kind of place people pass every day without noticing. I turned off the engine and sat there, hands still on the wheel. Not shaking. Just still. Because now, I had seen enough to understand one thing clearly: this wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake. This was a system. Carefully timed visits. Separate arrivals. Controlled behavior at home. Even that whisper at dinner, it wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes for a moment. And that's when the past started to rearrange itself. Little things. Small moments I had dismissed. Daniel taking calls outside, Emily offering to help with his appointments, receipts that didn't quite match the explanations. At the time, they were nothing. Now they were everything. Each memory slid into place like part of a larger design. Not messy. Not emotional. Structured. I opened my eyes again and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Same face. Same woman. But something behind the eyes had changed. Not pain. Not anger. Clarity. And clarity is dangerous. When I finally returned home, the house was quiet again. Emily's car was already in the driveway. Of course. She had always been good at getting back first. Resetting the scene. I stepped inside and set my keys down in their usual place. Nothing looked out of order. The living room was neat. The kitchen clean. A soft scent of lavender lingered in the air. Carefully maintained. Like nothing had ever happened. Emily stood at the counter, arranging flowers in a glass vase. White lilies. My favorite. Or at least, they used to be. "You're back early," she said without turning around. Her tone was light. Unbothered. I removed my coat slowly, hanging it up with care. "Plans change," I replied. She nodded, adjusting a stem slightly. I was just freshening things up. I glanced at the flowers. "They're beautiful." She smiled faintly. "I thought you'd like them." I walked closer, stopping just a few feet away. Close enough to see the precision in her movements. The way she placed each flower just so. Controlled. Always controlled. "Emily," I said softly. She looked up. For a brief second, our eyes locked. And this time, there was something new in hers. Not confidence. Not entirely. A question. A small one. But enough. I held her gaze just long enough to let the silence stretch. Then I said, "You've been very busy lately." Her fingers stilled on the vase. Just for a moment. Then she smiled again. "Yes. Life gets that way." I nodded. "It does." I turned and walked away. No accusations. No confrontation. Not yet. Because now, I didn't just suspect. I understood. And once you understand the structure of something, you don't rush to break it. You study it. You let it run just long enough. Until the moment comes when it can't hold itself together anymore. That evening, I made dinner again. Same table, same plates, same quiet routine. Nothing changed on the surface. That was important. Because people like Emily, people like Daniel, they rely on consistency. They need the illusion that everything is still under control. And I was giving them exactly that. Michael came home a little later than usual. He looked tired, but distracted more than anything else. Emily greeted him at the door. A soft voice, a gentle smile, a hand resting lightly on his arm. Perfect. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd think she was devoted. Daniel sat at the table before the food was even ready. That was new. He used to wait in the living room. Watch television. Pretend he wasn't hungry until everything was served. Now, he sat there early. Watching. Not me. The room. The timing. I placed the plates down one by one. Chicken. Rice. Steamed vegetables. No one spoke at first. The silence wasn't awkward. It was measured. Careful. Like everyone was choosing their next move without saying it out loud. I took my seat last. Folded my napkin. Looked at each of them, just briefly. Then I began to eat. Halfway through the meal, Michael looked up. "Mom, are you okay?" A simple question. But it hung in the air longer than it should have. I met his eyes. "I'm fine." And I was. That was the truth. Not because nothing was wrong, but because I had stopped expecting anything from them. Expectation is what breaks you. Clarity steadies you. Emily reached for her glass of water. Her hand was steady, but slower than usual. She was listening. Always listening. Daniel cleared his throat again. That same sound. But this time, it carried something else. Pressure. He was waiting for something to happen. For me to say it. To expose it. To break the surface of what they had built. But I didn't. Instead, I set my fork down gently and said I was thinking about making some changes. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Now I had their attention. Changes? Michael asked. I nodded. To the house. To some of the arrangements. I kept my tone calm. Almost casual. Daniel's fingers tightened slightly around his fork. Emily didn't move at all. But I saw it. That brief stillness again. That calculation. What kind of changes? She asked. Soft. Careful. I gave a small smile. The kind that make things clearer. No one spoke. After that. But the silence wasn't the same anymore. It had weight now. Because for the first time, they weren't sure what I knew. And that uncertainty? It was the beginning of everything unraveling. The next morning, I didn't wait for anything to happen. I started moving first. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just deliberately. I woke up at the same time. Made the same coffee. Opened the same curtains. Routine. But underneath that routine, something had shifted. I was no longer reacting. I was positioning. After breakfast, I went to my room and closed the door. Not all the way. Just enough. Old habits. I sat at my desk, the one Daniel had bought me years ago, back when he used to notice the things I needed before I said them out loud. The wood was worn smooth under my fingers. Familiar. Reliable. Unlike everything else in this house. I opened the drawer slowly. Inside were documents I hadn't touched in years. Property papers, bank records, insurance policies. Everything we had built, together. Or at least, that's what I had believed. I took them out one by one, laying them neatly across the desk. No rushing. No panic. Just quiet review. Names, dates, signatures, and then I saw it. A change. Small. Subtle. But enough. A secondary authorization added to one of the accounts. Recent. Very recent. I didn't react. I didn't need to. Because now I knew this wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was structural. Legal. Planned. There was a soft knock at the door. Then Emily's voice. "Are you busy?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit. Then, "Come in." She stepped inside, her expression carefully neutral. Her eyes moved quickly. Desk. Papers. Me. She noticed everything. Of course she did. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said. "You didn't." I picked up one of the documents and placed it back into the folder. Slowly. Controlled. She took a step closer. "You've been organizing things lately." Not a question. An observation. I nodded. "It's time." She smiled faintly. "For what?" I looked at her then. Directly. "For clarity." That word again. This time, it landed differently. She held my gaze for a second longer than usual. And there it was, the first real crack. Not fear. But pressure. Because now she understood something she hadn't before. I wasn't drifting. I wasn't confused. I wasn't going to react the way she expected. I was preparing. After she left the room, I gathered the papers back into a single folder. Closed it. Placed it back in the drawer. Not hidden. Not locked. Just waiting. Because timing matters. And rushing? Rushing is what people do when they're losing control. I stood up and looked around the room. At the bed, the dresser, the small details of a life that had been built over decades. Then I walked to the mirror. Same reflection. Same calm expression. But now, there was something else behind it. Not just awareness. Intent. Because once you understand the structure of the betrayal, the next step is simple. You don't confront it. You don't expose it. Not yet. You let them continue. You give them space to move. To act. To believe they're still ahead. And then, when everything is in place, you take it all back. Without ever raising your voice. I didn't wait long to take the next step. Waiting is useful, but only when you already know where you're going. By early afternoon, I was in my car again. Same route. Same quiet streets. But this time, I wasn't observing. I was confirming. The bank was only 15 minutes away. A place I had walked into hundreds of times over the years. Deposits. Withdrawals. Routine questions. Back when everything felt shared. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment. Not out of hesitation. Out of habit. I had learned something important over the last few days. Every move matters more when it looks like nothing at all. I stepped inside. Cool air. Soft lighting. The faint hum of printers and quiet conversations. Normal. That word again. A young clerk greeted me with a polite smile. "Good afternoon. How can I help you today?" I returned the smile. "I'd like to review a few accounts." Simple. Neutral. Expected. She nodded and guided me to a desk. A few minutes later, the screen was turned slightly toward me. Names. Numbers. Balances. All familiar. Until they weren't. I pointed lightly. "This one," I said. She clicked. Opened the details. And there it was again. That same addition. Authorization. Not mine. Not something I had approved. "Can you tell me when this change was made?" I asked. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. "About 3 weeks ago," she said. 3 weeks. I nodded slowly. "And who added it?" She hesitated. Not out of refusal. Out of protocol. "I'm sorry, I'll need to verify a few things before I can disclose that." Of course. I expected that. I reached into my bag and placed my ID on the desk. "Take your time." My voice didn't change. Didn't tighten. Didn't reveal anything. Because this wasn't the moment for reaction. This was the moment for information. 10 minutes later, I had what I needed. Not everything. But enough. A name. A signature. A confirmation that what I had seen at home was only part of something much larger. I thanked the clerk, gathered my things, and walked out the same way I came in. Quietly. Without drawing attention. Back in the car, I didn't start the engine right away. I looked down at the copy of the record in my hand. Clean. Official. Undeniable. And for the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge it fully. This wasn't just betrayal in a home. This was coordination. Planning. Access. I folded the paper neatly and placed it back in my bag. Carefully. Like something valuable. Because it was. Not as evidence. Not yet. But as leverage. When I got home, nothing looked different. Of course not. Emily was in the kitchen again. Daniel in the living room. The same positions. The same roles. But I saw it now. The structure underneath. The invisible lines connecting everything. I set my bag down and walked past them without a word. No need to speak. Not yet. Because now? I wasn't just watching anymore. I was holding a piece of the foundation they thought I'd never find. And foundations, once you know where they are very easy to break. That night, I didn't change anything. Dinner was served at the same time, same table, same routine. But this time, I chose the moment. Michael was home early. That alone was unusual. He sat at the table, not on his phone for once. Just there. Quiet. Present. Emily noticed it too. I could tell by the way she adjusted her tone. Softer. More attentive. Like she was recalibrating. Daniel looked between them, then at me. Briefly. Then away. Always away. I placed the last dish on the table and took my seat. No one spoke for the first few minutes. Just the sound of utensils. Plates. Water being poured. Normal. Carefully normal. Halfway through the meal, I set my fork down. Not loudly. Just enough. It was a small sound. But it was enough to shift the room. 3 pairs of eyes lifted. Waiting. I folded my hands neatly on the table. I stopped by the bank today. Silence. Instant. Heavy. Michael frowned slightly. The bank, he asked. I nodded. Yes. I reviewed a few things. I didn't look at him. I looked at Daniel. Then Emily. Her face didn't change. But her hand did. It tightened slightly around her glass. Just enough. I found something interesting, I continued. My voice stayed calm. Measured. No accusation. No emotion. Just information. Daniel cleared his throat again. That same sound. But this time, it didn't hide anything. It revealed it. What kind of thing? He asked. Careful. Too careful. I tilted my head slightly. A change, I said. A recent one. Emily finally spoke. What kind of change? Soft. Controlled. But now, there was something underneath. Not confidence. Not anymore. I let the silence stretch. Just a second longer than necessary. Then, authorization. One word. That was all. Michael looked confused. Authorization for what? I didn't answer him. Not yet. Because this wasn't about clarity for him. This was about pressure for them. I reached for my glass of water and took a slow sip. Then I set it down. Deliberately. I wasn't aware we were making decisions like that without discussing them. Still calm. Still quiet. But now. There was weight behind every word. Daniel shifted in his seat. Emily didn't move. Not at all. Too still. I'm sure there's an explanation, I added. And there it was. The opening. The invitation. The moment where they could step forward. Or stay silent. No one spoke. Not Daniel. Not Emily. Not even Michael. Because now? The structure had been touched. Not broken. Not exposed. Just pressed. And sometimes. That's all it takes. A single point of pressure. To make everything underneath start to crack. The silence didn't break. It stretched. Thin, but unignorable. Michael looked between us, confusion turning slowly into concern. Mom, what's going on? I turned to him then. For the first time that night. And I softened my voice, just slightly. Nothing you need to worry about. Not yet. That word lingered. Yet. I reached into my bag and placed a single folded paper on the table. Not pushed. Not thrown. Just set down. No one touched it. But all eyes went to it. Especially Emily's. She knew. Before anyone else did. She always did. Daniel swallowed. What is that? He asked. I didn't look at him. It's a copy, I said calmly. Of a change made 3 weeks ago. Michael leaned forward slightly. A change to what? I met his eyes briefly. Something that used to belong to both of us. Then I looked back at Daniel. And held it there. Emily finally moved. Just a small shift in her posture. But it was enough. The first real movement that wasn't controlled. Not perfectly. Not completely. You're misunderstanding, she said. Her voice was still soft. But now, it was faster. That wasn't, I raised my hand slightly. Not to stop her. Just to pause the moment. And she did. I haven't said anything yet, I replied. Still calm. Still steady. But I will. I let that settle. Not loud. Not dramatic. But final. Daniel didn't speak again. Emily didn't either. Because now? They both understood something very clearly. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This wasn't emotion. This was evidence. And I hadn't even shown all of it yet. I picked up my fork again. Took another bite. Chewed slowly. Then added, almost as an afterthought, we'll talk about it soon. Not tonight. Not like this. Because control isn't about exposing everything at once. It's about choosing the moment. When they have nowhere left to stand. No one finished their meal that night. Not properly. Michael was the first to stand. He looked at me, then at the paper, then at his father. What is this? He asked again, his voice tighter now. Not confused anymore. Concerned. Daniel opened his mouth. Closed it. Then looked at Emily. That was the moment. Small. Quiet. But undeniable. Michael saw it. I saw it. And Emily. Emily didn't look away. It's nothing, she said quickly. Just a misunderstanding, then explain it, Michael cut in. His tone had changed. Sharpened. For the first time, he wasn't passive. He was paying attention. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Because this part was never mine to carry. Truth has a way of moving on its own, once it's given space. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly. Michael, sit down, he said. But his voice lacked authority. It sounded tired. Cornered. Michael didn't sit. What is she talking about? He asked again. This. Time, to both of them. Not me. Them. Emily exhaled slowly. Controlled. Still trying to hold the structure together. It's just paperwork, she said. Your dad asked me to help with some things, at the bank. Michael interrupted. Silence. Again. But now it wasn't controlled. It was breaking. I reached for my glass. Took a sip. Set it down. I think, I said quietly, you deserve the full picture. Michael turned to me immediately. What picture? I held his gaze. Steady. Unwavering. The one they've been carefully managing, without you. Daniel looked at me then. Really looked. For the first time in days. And in his eyes. I saw it. Not guilt. Not yet. But the realization. That this wasn't staying contained. That whatever they had built in silence was now standing in the open. Unprotected. Emily's hand moved toward the paper. Slowly. As if touching it might change something. It didn't. Because some moments, once they begin to unravel, don't stop. And this one? This one had already gone too far. Michael didn't sit down again. He stayed standing, right there at the edge of the table, like if he moved, something would collapse. Mom, he said, quieter now. Tell me. So I did. Not everything. Not the whisper at dinner and not the child. Not yet. Because some truths don't need to be said all at once to be understood. I reached into my bag again and placed a second paper on the table. This one, more detailed. Dates, signatures, access clear. Undeniable. Michael picked it up. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slower. Then they stopped. And when he looked up, he wasn't confused anymore. You added her, he asked Daniel. Not angry. Not loud. Just stunned. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Silence has a way of confirming everything. Michael turned to Emily. You knew about this. She hesitated. Just once. That was enough. I stood up slowly. Not to leave. Just to end it. Because this was never about winning. It was about clarity. And now everyone had it. I won't stay in a house where I have to question my place, I said quietly. No emotion. No trembling. Just truth. I've already made the changes I needed to make. 3 faces turned toward me. That word again. Changes. The accounts have been secured, I continued, the property has been reassigned. I paused. Just long enough. So whatever plans were being made, won't hold. No one stopped me when I walked away from the table. Not Daniel. Not Emily. Not even Michael. Because sometimes, the strongest thing you can do isn't to fight for a place in someone else's life. It's to quietly remove yourself. And take everything that was ever yours with you. Later that night, as I stood by the window, looking out at the darkened yard, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. Stronger. Peace. They thought I didn't understand. They thought I would break. They thought I would stay. They were wrong. Because I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to explain. I didn't even need them to admit it. I just needed to see it clearly. And once I did, I chose myself. For the first time in years.